after 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., we actually notice that we become more resistant to carbohydrates, meaning our bodies can't metabolize carbohydrates in the same way that it can during the day. And so the majority of what we're going to be consuming at night is actually going to be stored into body fat. Are you ready to bring your dream body and health into life, but just can't seem to keep the motivation going? And is it finally time to address the self-sabotage and the unwanted eating behaviors such as binge eating, emotional eating, and nighttime eating that you know are getting in the way of your goals? Do you ever wonder what it would take for you to feel in control of your rituals so that you can stay consistent and see results? Welcome to this week's special Make Peace with Food Minisode on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast, where you'll learn how to overcome unwanted eating behavior and other self-sabotaging habits by shifting your nervous system so that your body works with you instead of against you. I'm your host, Shaban, and with each episode, I am honored to be your coach and guide in the journey to make peace with food and find food and body freedom so that struggle with weight is a thing of the past. When you tune in every Thursday on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast, you'll catch the latest conversation on unwanted eating behaviors and learn how to shift the nervous system, rewire the brain to new patterns, and end the food and body obsession so you finally feel relaxed and no longer confused around food. Now, before we begin, I want to quickly invite you to grab a free copy of my Food Freedom ebook that I have for you at makepeacewithfood.com. And if you find that this conversation resonates with you today, then I also want to invite you to join our free Make Peace with Food Facebook community at myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com, where you can connect with me and my team directly. The links are in the show notes. And of course, if you know somebody who you feel could benefit from these conversations and discussions, make sure to share this podcast with them too. All right, athletes, now let's get into it. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about how to stop nighttime snacking or nighttime eating, because this is the one habit that I see over and over again. I have to say, in about 90% of the people that I work with, this is the one habit that I continue to see over and over again. And I have to admit, this was a habit that I was sucked into for years, and it was so hard to break. And no matter how much discipline and how much willpower I poured into it, it was just one of those habits that was so challenging to break until I discovered that it's not a discipline problem. And so as we begin to roll in and just wait for more people to join us, I'm curious, who here is struggling with nighttime snacking or nighttime eating? And it's this weird thing that just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's like you're suddenly possessed by this insane desire to eat. And it's almost like you can't satisfy that urge. It starts maybe with the popcorn, then it becomes ice cream, and then chips, and then cookies. So I'm just super curious. Who's noticing that this is something out of all of the unwanted eating behaviors that they're currently facing? This is something that is so challenging to break. I actually want to share with you a little bit of what's going on with me in this week. I don't know who's got kids that are going back to school, but it is chaos in my house. Like, this time of year is the most chaotic time of year. It's a time of year where I'm personally very stressed with all the schedules. I do a lot of driving for my girls. I wish they appreciated it, but they don't always appreciate it. And it's also a time where I'm also getting back onto a new schedule because the summer routine looks one way, and now all of a sudden it's fall, it's back to school, and the routine starts to change. So it actually becomes a very, very stressful time of year for me. And I wish my kids could make it easier by complying, but they're teenagers. Oh my God, that's so fun. The teenage years, they're amazing. If you're now working with small kids, or if you have small kids, I have to say, it is a walk the park compared to working with teenagers. But I hope that this phase will be over soon. But this is one of the things that really causes us a lot of stress. It's these big changes in our lives, like coming back to school and coming back to routines, or changing routines, or suddenly someone becoming ill, or maybe even a really challenging time at work. These are stressful times that most often lead us to these unwanted eating behaviors, whether that is emotional eating, stress eating, nighttime snacking, like we are going to be discussing today. And so again, just to get a feel for anybody right now who's struggling with that, please comment below. And so go ahead and participate as I share, because if you have questions around how to stop this, especially if you've been relying on willpower or on strict discipline to stop this, and it works for a short time, but then all of a sudden you see that this one habit keeps coming back, please let me know, because again, this is a game changer. This is really important. And one of the biggest reasons is because at night, when we are looking at the circadian rhythm, and the circadian rhythm is this internal clock that dictates when certain hormones are going to peak throughout the day. But if we look at our circadian rhythm after 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., we actually notice that we become more resistant to carbohydrates, meaning our bodies can't metabolize carbohydrates in the same way that it can during the day. And so the majority of what we're going to be consuming at night is actually going to be stored into body fat. So if we were to eat the same thing during the day, it's less likely that it's going to be stored into body fat. Our body actually has an opportunity to utilize it. But when we're consuming these foods at night, it just becomes a higher chance for the body to actually store this food. And of course, store it in a way that we want to avoid. This is the way that we're always working on. So learning to understand the body, learning why there is a need to overcome this behavior is incredibly important. And it's not just about the undesired weight gain, right? That's one thing. But what about the interrupted sleep? You notice when you eat at night, and I used to notice this all the time. When I'd go to bed on a super full stomach, oh my God, what a miserable night it would be. I would be up all night and just constantly waking up every hour, every couple of hours, feeling the food actually digesting in my belly. I would feel super bloated. In the morning, I'd wake up with a big bloated belly, and it just would make me almost feel hungover. And so when we have interrupted sleep like that, we don't get that restful sleep, we actually can't also normalize all those hormones that are responsible for fat loss. And what ends up happening is we kick in the leptin hormone. That's the hormone that is responsible for really satiety and really making us feel that we've had enough food. So we trigger that hormone, and we also trigger the other hormone, ghrelin, and actually put them in an imbalance. And ghrelin is that hormone that is responsible for hunger. It's released from the stomach. It actually gets us to crave food. So when we have disrupted sleep, these two hormones are affected. Ghrelin actually spikes, and then leptin goes down, meaning that we actually will feel more hungry. We're going to have more cravings, and especially in the middle of the afternoon and then later on in the evening. So it's this pattern that we get stuck in because we're not sleeping restfully, and then we're up all night digesting. We are tampering with our circadian rhythm, our natural hormones, and as a result, ending up the next day jumping right back into that cycle, no matter how many times we've promised ourselves that we're not going to do it. And here's the thing. Eating at night is actually a survival mechanism, and it's triggered by the nervous system. And so no matter how much discipline or no matter how much self-promise we make that we're going to stop this pattern, we actually won't stop it unless we understand how the nervous system works. Discipline only works for a short amount of time. And after that, we tend to fall back into our old patterns. In fact, the more that we force ourselves, the more that we use discipline, what we're actually also doing is building a reward system in the brain to actually want to do that habit or have that food even more. And so the way around it is to actually work on the nervous system. And the part of the nervous system that we're always talking about is the autonomic nervous system. That is the part of the nervous system that is responsible for that fight or flight mechanism or the sympathetic nervous state. We call that protection mode in our Make Peace with Food program because so much happens in the body, and all of these things that are happening now, these unwanted behaviors like eating at night, is actually a protection mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. Your body thinks that it needs to survive something. So the more you take it away, it just wants it more because you're literally telling your body that you can't have that thing that it thinks it's relying on for survival. And so if you understand this and you understand how to bypass this mechanism, how to regulate the nervous system so that it goes into parasympathetic, we call that safety mode, where the body feels safe, It doesn't have all these cravings, it doesn't have this high need to keep eating or self-sabotaging, and remove that discipline, really understand how to work with the nervous system, then those cravings suddenly disappear. And it happens all the time, whether you're experiencing emotional eating, stress eating, unwanted eating behaviors, or even other behaviors. And we talk about food being just one vehicle, one behavior that is a result of this unbalanced nervous system state, this constant protection mode dominance. But it could also be going to cannabis or alcohol or other substances or other behaviors to help regulate that temporary dopamine hit. And that's really what we want to understand. We want to understand that everything we're doing is for that short-term reward. And most often eating at night, if you think about it, it is because we're looking forward to some sort of reward. Throughout our day, it can be very stressful. And like I shared with you earlier, right now is a very stressful time for me because everything is just out of control in terms of scheduling. My kids are back at school. I've got to drive them everywhere. I'm trying to regulate my schedule at work, at home, and just really try to organize everything. And I'm sure you're experiencing something like that too, especially this time of year. And if you're caring for a sick or loved person, if you are caring for somebody, or if you're having to go to the hospital to visit them, if you're going through something like that yourself, or you're just overcoming surgery, these are stressful times in our lives where we're always looking for a reward. We're trying to move away from pain and move towards pleasure. And this is on an unconscious level. We do this on a subconscious level where it's actually using that part of the brain that we are not really aware of. And that's the part of the brain that we work on when we are regulating the nervous system, because all of these behaviors, all of these choices are very primitive. And they're not conscious choices, even though logically we know eating at night oftentimes results in unwanted weight gain, or eating at night could disrupt my sleep, or I tend to notice I'm more bloated. Even though we know this, we can't stop doing this using just the rational mind, right? Like, we know that smoking causes certain potential side effects. We know that eating more fast food or processed foods cause certain potential side effects. We know this, but why can't we take action? But we can't take action because there's still this part of the brain that's actually running the whole operation. It gets to decide for us. And it is deciding based on survival, not based on consciousness, not based on you actually making a rational decision. And the more you try to rationalize it, you can hire the nutritionist. You can set up an accountability partner. You can promise more discipline for yourself. Whatever your mechanism is, you're going to notice that it only works for a short amount of time until that part of the brain takes over again. And there you go. You find yourself self-sabotaging once again, doing that thing that you promised yourself you would never do, because this is going on a very unconscious level. And that's the part of the brain that we need to get to. We need to reorganize and rewire the way that we think so that we start to feel safe in our environment. And again, I use that word safety a lot. And we oftentimes think, well, I'm not feeling like I'm under any harm. Like, I don't feel like anyone's attacking me. I don't feel like I'm under any threat. And that's the thing. It is an imposed threat. This threat is something that is perceived by the body and not really by the rational mind. And so the body responds in that constant fight or flight or sympathetic nervous dominance, again, which we call protection mode. So if you really want to stop any unwanted eating behavior, including nighttime snacking, first understand that if it's hard for you to stop, if you've tried over and over and over again, notice that you get temporary results, or you can discipline yourself for just a short amount of time before you find yourself right back into it, then this is 100% a nervous system issue. And if it's a nervous system issue, then again, no amount of discipline is going to get you to stop. You really have to rewire your nervous system. You have to shift your nervous system from protection mode to safety mode. And this is a process that actually takes only 6 months. And imagine what would happen if you're constantly in safety mode. If you know how to regulate your nervous system, you know how to regulate your emotions so that you're not going for these coping mechanisms or using food as reward. What would happen if you stopped using food as a reward or as a pick-me-up? And you started to notice that you're eating less and less and less and craving less and less and less of these refined foods and processed foods. Once you're craving less and less and less of these processed foods and refined foods, well, what's going to be the impact on the body? If you're no longer consuming these foods at the rate that you were consuming them at,
Well, there would be a direct reaction with the body. There would be an impact. And that impact, of course, would be the release of weight, unnecessary weight. And remember, our body holds on to stored fat for protection. Our body gets us to eat more for protection. Our body gets us to have those cravings so that we can and want and desire those foods because, again, it's for protection. So if that is no longer in place and your body's feeling safe, there is no perceived threat, there is no stress, you're able to regulate all the things going on in your life emotionally and nervous system, and from a nervous system state, then you are no longer driven to overconsume these foods. And if you don't overconsume these foods, then of course the natural process would be that your body would release all of this stored energy that it no longer needs. And this is what we see over and over and over again. Without dieting, without over exercising, without overly restricting, if you regulate your nervous system, release all of these cravings, stop all of the unwanted eating behaviors such as emotional eating, binge eating, and nighttime snacking, you're going to find yourself naturally releasing weight, having more energy, feeling amazing and more confident, again, without that imposed discipline and those constant restrictions and the frustration that comes along with it. And so if you're curious, if you have a nervous system issue involvement when it comes to food or any other unwanted eating behavior, then I am going to invite you for a free 30-minute coaching call. What we're going to do on this call together is determine whether or not there's a nervous system issue involvement. I'm going to go through a whole bunch of questions where I'm going to be specifically looking for certain triggers. And if I find out that there is a nervous system issue involvement, I'm going to share with you different ways that Make Peace with Food can support you to overcome that in 6 months or less. It is a no-brainer. Imagine what would happen if you got started now. What would happen in 6 months? Where would you be even just 3 months from now? Imagine what would happen if you stopped all of these unwanted eating behaviors. And if I feel like, by the way, during our time together, that there is no nervous system issue involvement, then I'll also let you know just the same. But either way, it's going to be a win-win situation for you, don't you think? You're going to at least know whether or not all these things that you're experiencing, all these failed diets that you've tried, all of these different ways that you've tried to change your food that never got you a result is actually not your fault. But the issue is that your nervous system is constantly feeling the need to survive. And it's driving you to these behaviors that you're trying to eradicate. And so let's see together if that is the issue, and let's see how we can put some things in place to move forward. There are no strings attached, only for you just to find out whether or not there is a nervous system issue involvement and help you overcome nighttime snacking or emotional eating or binge eating, all of that unwanted eating behavior that keeps getting in the way of your results, that over time results in more and more weight gain. And let me tell you, this can happen for you in 6 months or less. And this is what we always see over and over again. It is that simple. All right, so with that, I want to wish you a very beautiful rest of your day. I hope that this conversation has served you in some way. Thank you for listening to this week's Make Peace with Food Minisode on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast. If this has resonated with you today, I want to invite you to subscribe to the show so you never miss a beat. And if you know someone who could benefit from this conversation, then please share this episode with them. Let's work together to help as many people as possible make peace with food and fall in love with fitness. And by the way, I need to mention that if you rate and review this podcast on iTunes and send over the screenshot to Sherry at sherryshaban.com, you'll receive a $500 voucher to join me at one of my upcoming retreats or to use it in our Make Peace with Food coaching program. And don't forget to visit myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com to join the free Facebook group for more resources. And remember, athlete, you are an inspiration. I cannot wait to hear your story.